All right, welcome everyone to this session of the Friends webinar series. Hopefully my voice is coming through. If so, maybe I think Paulina could actually send me a message in Teams just to be sure that everything is coming through properly. But today our topic is going to be the new Friends enterprise tasks, which basically are a collection of these new tasks that we are unveiling in the coming months. And today the idea is to kind of go through what are they all about, how do they work, how do you get access to them, and then finish off on a small demo of showing them off in actual action, connecting towards HubSpot and a couple of other systems using the new methodology that comes with the new enterprise tasks. But without further ado, I think we should get going here. And before we get started, I should probably introduce myself again. So my name is Asmo Urpilainen, and I'm the director for product development here at HiQ for Friends. So that means I'm basically responsible for the whole business area of Friends, and I'm running the product development team, sales, marketing, and so on. But let's get started straight off the bat. So what are the new Friends enterprise tasks that we are talking about? So I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with the current Friends task systems that we've set up, basically that we're calling from now onwards the open source connectors or open source tasks, which are of course available for everyone under our GitHub page there, that are most commonly used to actually implement the integration scenarios and have been the kind of bread and butter of Friends development up until now. And of course, we have the developer ecosystem built around that, where our customers, consultants, whoever who's actually using or developing something with Friends has the option of actually joining the ecosystem or joining the community and exposing their own tasks as these open source connectors. And do not forget the other side of the coin is that with Friends, of course, we are compatible with the whole Nugget ecosystem. So basically anything that's hosted on Nugget should be something that you should be able to get running with Friends with quite little effort. And this is of course the way that we've been dealing with the Friends tasks and the connectors in Friends for quite some time now. So I believe we've been on this path for something like 3 or 4 years now, and we've always been kind of missing, and there's been a lot of requests from our customers to try and onboard more of these sort of or kind of plug and play style tasks or plug and play style connectors. And last year we did a webinar actually on the topic of the EDI library called EDI Fabric that we are using with Friends to actually implement the EDI functionality from parsing, creation, and or EDI creation, validation. So all of the kind of standard EDI functionality is provided to us by the EDI Fabric library, and you should definitely go check out the other webinar on YouTube when we're talking about the EDI Fabric tasks and the EDI transformation and integrations in general in more in depth. But from now onwards, what are we actually going to be talking about mainly today is now the new CData connectors to actually bring this plug and play connectivity functionality to Friends. And how do they actually work, or what are the CData tasks that we're going to be talking about today? Quite simply put, CData is basically a company that specializes in creating the sort of kind of plug and play code connector. So basically what they're creating, or what their product or platform is just a bunch of different types of code. So basically they are developing C# code that allows you to utilize a harmonized SQL functionality or SQL interface to connect to over 150 kind of application systems, cloud services, social media, whatever you could pretty much think of. They've created this sort of a connector library for that functionality. And now with Friends, we've actually partnered up with the CData guys and are able to bring all of the different CData connectivity tasks to you in the form of actually Friends tasks. So that probably means that in the coming months, so we've been actually hard at work already creating the task, but in the coming months, all of the CData connectors that you can find on their website, and we'll actually take a look at that in a moment, will be coming to you to a Friends nearby or a Friends near to you, where you can actually then start using them and building your integrations towards all of these cloud services and systems much faster than previously. But how do they actually work? So what's the catch here? So why are we actually doing this? And the main reason behind the CData partnership and the whole enterprise tasks and the plug and play connectivity is pretty much summed up on this slide quite nicely. So how do all of these different plug and play connectors now actually work in Friends is the way that we've actually now implemented access to those systems that you actually see listed here. And of course, we can go through these in more detail a little bit later on. But basically, what the CData tasks or connectors do is that they wrap access to all of the different systems and servers and applications that are supported and harmonize the development. So basically, the standard integration functionalities into an SQL format. So that means that, for example, in the case of, let's take Jira, so we're actually going to be looking at Jira in the demo a little bit later, or Facebook. Usually you would have to integrate towards these applications or systems, or actually cloud services more likely, by implementing the functionality or the integration functionality using the standard Friends REST connector and consuming the REST interfaces that Facebook or Jira or PayPal or whatever exposes. Or similarly, if we're doing SAP integrations, you would have used the Friends standard SAP connector to consume some SAP functions and providing input, getting something back from there. And all of these different systems and applications that are now supported, of course, have quite different methods on how do you authenticate, how do you query data, how do you update data, do you have any sort of insert options, or the kind of standard read, write, update functionality for all of these different systems are sometimes work on a different protocol. So sometimes you're running on a pure TCP protocol, like in the case of SAP RFC functions. Sometimes you're on top of the HTTP protocol or HTTPS protocol when you're dealing with REST interfaces. Sometimes you're doing SOAP request in the case of, for example, older Dynamics 365 systems and so on. But basically, the whole idea here is that now you simply choose which system you're actually interested in, or which is the application you want to create your integration scenario towards, and you will simply be writing standard SQL. So in the case, for example, if we wanted to retrieve, let's say, accounts from SAP, instead of us having to actually figure out which table should we query in SAP, or which REST interface should we use in Jira, we can simply write a small script or a small piece of pure SQL code to actually retrieve all of the information that we're interested. And what the CData actually functionality brings to the table is that it takes the SQL that the developer provides. So for example, in our case, select star from accounts where account ID is 50. So the CData tasks takes this input, so the SQL Curie input, and they transform that into the appropriate, for example, REST request to then actually get the data out from Jira. And they're also, of course, harmonizing the way that you provide credentials and accessibility to the actual systems itself. And what we are doing then, of course, on top of that is providing you with a nice way of writing the SQL, testing the tasks, and so on. But then, of course, we are adding the kind of a post-processing layer to that CData functionality. So if the CData task is now taking the SQL query, transforming that into a REST request, which gets some data back, we are then adding functionality on top of that to actually make the result of the query to any of the systems that we have standardized and then usable in rest of Friends. And the best way to kind of maybe think about this is that now you could utilize the CData or enterprise tasks in Friends to basically access all of the functionality of all of these systems as if they were a standard SQL database, instead of having to worry about what sort of version am I using in this and this API, or how should I authenticate towards this and this system, or what is the purpose, or how should I now actually combine data from multiple different sources, since now, of course, the CData tasks are also supporting all of the standard transaction SQL functionality. So you can do calculations there, you can do joins, so you could join data from, for example, let's take accounts and for example, if we wanted to join accounts into, let's say, projects in Jira, for example, we could definitely do that. So we can actually now write SQL to get exactly the data that we're interested in, and of course then perform the updates and inserts by using that same standard SQL functionality that we have available. So that actually streamlines the development towards all of these different systems that we're supporting here, by simply making the access towards the system act in the form of an SQL query. But if we kind of like move forward here, so why should you be kind of interested in these enterprise connectors? So of course the obvious reason here is that it's actually much easier to do the actual development by simply writing standard SQL instead of having to worry about the specific formats and types of tasks that you're going to be using, or combining different sorts of requests to get the desired end result. So the most obvious reason there is, of course, just speeding up the development, making the development much easier based on the SQL instead of the actual protocol and actual functionality that the system would require normally. But also some things to consider here, which might be of interest to some customers, is that, of course, utilizing now this sort of a third-party partner to provide this connectivity allows us to actually get Friends certified, or actually system certified connectivity towards some of the systems. And this basically means that in the case of, let's take, for example, SAP, now because we've partnered up with CData, we can have a Friends certified SAP connector. Or if you're utilizing, let's say, Dynamics as your ERP, we can now have Dynamics certified connectivity towards the system. And in some cases, these might make life a little bit easier when dealing with these systems, or dealing with vendors who are delivering these systems. But the most important thing here also is that now, of course, you will always be kind of up to date on the latest developments there on the kind of system connectivity front, since now, of course, if it's a certified connector, that has to be up to date all the time. And we've, of course, automated the whole framework of how are we planning to keep the tasks and the connectivity up to date when utilizing these Friends enterprise tasks. And one maybe key point here to kind of note as well is that if you're using the new enterprise tasks, of course, it makes the development easier and faster, but also much more understandable. So basically, it will lower the barrier of entry by quite a bit, since most, or usually, developers or whoever might be building the integrations are familiar on how SQL works, and there's a bunch of great tutorials on how should you write SQL and how does that whole world of stuff works. So that basically means that if you only want to learn a single, let's say, language, or let's say, or like a protocol in a sense, if you learn SQL really well, that means that now using the enterprise tasks, you basically have access to all of these systems without having to learn REST APIs or authentication protocol, or any of the other systems that we might have we might have there as a problem. But now, of course, that problem is gone if you're using the enterprise tasks, since it's only SQL towards all of the different systems that we have available there. And just as a note there that you're of course in no way required to use the new enterprise tasks. So of course you can still continue on using the open source connectors, and of course we're continuously planning and implementing new connectors or friends tasks there on the open source side, and adding new functionality, since the CData only provides us with the, let's say, basic kind of connectivity functionality, which usually isn't enough to implement the whole integration use cases. So if we could utilize the CData tasks to actually update the data, insert data, and query data or get data out of the different systems and data sources, we will of course always then need the open source connectors to kind of complement that functionality by then doing transformations or validation or the kind of non-system dependent integration functionality that we might have available there in Friends. And yeah, just as a side note there, that even though we are unveiling this new functionality, it's in no way necessary for any customer to start using the enterprise connectors, and they can of course keep on or stick to the old method of utilizing the open source connectors, and in no way are you required to actually start using the new ones. And they're only mainly intended for those customers who want to get that speed, who want to get that faster time to market, who want to make that connectivity a lot easier. And of course in these cases it's mainly or in many cases it would be customers who are doing some of the development on their own when creating the integrations using Friends. All right, one last slide before we actually get to the demo portion there. So how do you kind of like get the CData connectors, and how can you actually get started there? So basically the way that we've now planned this is we plan to kind of roll out or onboard all of the customers to utilize the CData connectors is that, first of all, we'll bring the kind of development or testing capabilities to most likely all customers initially. So that means that in the coming months, you will probably start to see a separate section in your Friends tasks view, where of course you can then find out all the different CData connectors that are starting to plop up there on a week-by-week basis. And of course, we want you to kind of test things out, kind of like figure out and see and kind of develop a couple of integrations and see how much faster can they make, or how much easier can they make the integration development. But since we are partnering up with a third-party commercial partner, so the CData, that means that there is a cost for us, and that of course means that we have to roll over that cost to the customer. So we've actually managed to get a pretty good deal with CData, meaning that the connectors are actually, we're pricing the connectors at 100 euros per month per connector type. But that doesn't mean that it's actually the number of times you use the connector, but rather, as an example, if you had, let's say, Dynamics 365 or SAP, that would mean that you would have to get the SAP connector at a 100 euros per month, and then you would have to get the D65 connector at a 100 euros per month. But then you're allowed to use it to integrate towards as many systems as you would like. So you could have, let's say, 100 separate instances of SAP, and you would still only pay just the one extra 100 euros per month to do that connectivity. Or for example, in the case of the D365, you could implement, let's say, 1,000 different integrations or APIs towards that D365, and you would still only pay the 100 euros per month. So it's only which connectors, or basically which systems are you using from the catalog, and then just paying 100 euros extra per month per system, and that's it. No other costs or scaling fees or anything anything like that. And of course, this means that you probably won't take all of the tasks or all of the connectors, since there are more than 150. And of course, you still always have the option of figuring out, do you want to use the open source connectors to implement the functionality, or do you feel that it's faster and better to do it using the enterprise connector types that we have available there. And of course, once you've kind of tested things out and kind of figured out, should we use them, and or is this a good option for me, then in order to actually unlock the production usage for the connectors, you would need to be in touch with us, and of course your sales representative, or then of course just directly through the web chat there, or the help chat that you're all familiar with in Friends. But all right, let's jump to a brief demo of how the connectors work in real time, and let's go through a couple of example sites or pages here. So of course, just as a recap here, you all remember the Friends open source connectors that we have available on GitHub, and of course, yeah, you can still continue to keep on using these, and these will be updated, and of course, we are in no way abandoning them. It's more of a complement to provide the application level connectivity, while we are focusing on the kind of protocol level and the non-application functionality in the open source tasks. But just to kind of show you guys what we're talking about here, it's just CData.com, which is the partner that we've partnered up with now. And basically what this means is that on their website, they're listing or kind of showing off all of the different connectors that are there available for us. And the way that we've now actually onboarded, or kind of are designing the way that you're using the connectors, means that you will probably be visiting the CData website a little bit, since as we go a little bit further in the demo there, they're kind of responsible for the documentation now. And as we kind of move on to the actual examples here, we're probably going to be jumping a little bit on the CData documentation site here to, for example, see what should be the name of the imaginary table in the SQL Curie to, for example, get specific data out of the system that we're actually using and creating there. But if we actually, let's go through a simple example here on how do the tasks actually work. So like we discussed there earlier, we will of course bring the tasks there to you as basically standard Friends tasks that act like any other Friends task would. And of course, in this case, I'm going to go, if I check, for example, the Jira, and I wanted to actually implement an integration towards Jira, I would, of course, just in the same way as I do any other Friends task, I would query for the Jira execute query connector type and select that. And then afterwards, it's pretty much a simple set of writing the SQL query that you're interested in. And here is actually a good way, or the best way to actually go through the CData documentation here a little bit, since of course it's just standard SQL, but depending on the system a little bit, we also have special functionality for available for us here. So for example, in the case of Jira, which actually they have developed their own query language to find out, for example, issues or tickets in Jira system, we can actually now utilize that JQL here in our SQL or inside our SQL query, and combine that with other ways of actually querying the data or getting the data out from Jira. So that basically means that what I should do when starting the actual development there is go to the documentation for our CData task, and of course we will be linking towards the appropriate documentation here for all of our tasks, since that means that in the case of, for example, the Jira connection or the Jira task or enterprise task, there's a whole bunch of different data tables that are available for us. And for example, if we are go to the SQL compliance section here, there's really quite nice documentation and with examples telling on each connector and each task what you can do, what you're kind of allowed to do there. So in this case, for example, we have a couple of examples of how we can utilize different sorts of SQL operators and how should we actually now implement the query to get the data that we're actually interested in. And that also means that in the case of the data model documentation, that's also quite nicely documented here on the CData website, since of course Jira is offering the REST API that's actually being used to retrieve the data. In the case of the CData connector towards Jira, they've of course had to name now one of the imaginary tables inside the connector, something that's kind of like logical or makes sense, but isn't necessarily a one-to-one replica of the same name and stuff that they're using on the actual Jira interface. So in the case of Jira, they're, for example, using the issues table that we are now actually querying here to get the issues out. And in our case, for example, when we're also now utilizing the JQL option. So we're providing additional JQL queries, so Jira query language queries to get the issue that we're interested in. And pretty much what my query here is doing is just getting the first issue that actually is the Friends project, and it's ordering that so that then we're getting the latest issue out of the Friends project. So the latest open issue out of the Friends product development Jira issue there. And another thing to note here is that, of course, we now have the connection string option. So not only do the CData tasks or the enterprise tasks harmonize access towards the actual system itself, utilizing the SQL approach, but also access or the kind of authentication and authorization are harmonized in this connection string format, which means that, of course, there's a whole bunch of options that you're allowed to, you're able to use with each system in place. So in our case, what I'm doing here, for example, is I'm utilizing the username, or actually the SSO username and the password functionality to provide access to our specific Jira. And I'm, of course, also telling what is the location, or actually, I think it's not the location, it's the cloud ID, I believe, in this case, that we're using to specify which is our Jira tenant. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. Regarding, for example, caching the data, using some sort of a proxy. Do we do certification-based authentication or SSO-based authentication? So almost all of these different methods of actually specifying how do we want to connect towards a specific model. These are, of course, now different on a case-by-case basis, depending on the system. So some of them are, of course, standardized, like password and user are always kind of be just basic authentication if the system is supporting that. But in the case that we're going to be looking at next, which is, of course, then HubSpot, in the case of the HubSpot, we can't use username password authentication, and instead we have to use an API key. So there's a separate connection string functionality there to actually connect towards that. And in the case of actually providing the connection string, it's super straightforward. So we basically just provide the name of the value that we're interested in. So if I was to, or I wanted to actually now provide access to my Jira using an API token, it's just providing the, actually, let me change that to XML, providing the value and equals, and then my API token, which might be something like this. And just as you would in a connection string, you're just separating the different values using a semicolon. So in the case of Jira also, I would have to provide Actually, I'm again at the location there, and actually what I'm interested in is the URL for format there. So I would of course then get the URL there and use that exactly the same way. So say that the URL is actually https myjira.com/jira. So exactly the same way as you would use an SQL server's connectivity or SQL server's connection string. And of course, the best way to store the connection string would be in the environment variables view, like you would do with any other normal connection string functionality in Friends. But just as a note there, that when you start developing and start creating the tasks, be sure to check the connection string options for each of the systems that you're connecting towards, since of course these can vary a little bit on a system by system basis. But the nice thing there is that you of course only define that once, and you set it to an environment variable, and after you've set the connection string properly, then it's all about just using the connection string from the environment variables, and you don't have to worry about that anymore in any other cases, and that would be that. But just as an example here, so if we were to run through our use case here, where we have our select star from issues, where the JQL is limited to 1. Oh, hello. Was I actually talking to myself? Were you able to hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. I just panicked here a little bit since my headphones made a weird beeping sound, and I thought they went offline. But getting back on track here, so the idea here also, of course, is that now if we are writing our single SQL query here, we can of course test it out like we would any other SQL or integration functionality. So this in no way limited, or any of the normal Friends functionality is not hampered. So if I just run my SQL query against our Jira and get the latest ticket in the Friends project, and let's see what that actually would be. So we're running the test right now. It's running. Should be done in a moment here, hopefully. Any moment. Yeah. The first test of the day always takes a little bit longer than the follow-up and the following tests. But here we actually go. So we can do exactly the same stuff as we would in an SQL, or we get exactly the same result as we would when we were here, or we would have been querying a database. So the first thing to note here is, of course, that it's always going to be an array that gets back from the query, since we are dealing with SQL and we can have multiple results fit our query limit here, or our where condition. And that means that, of course, all the results, that all the CData tasks are always going to be arrays, but inside the array is a super standardized and actually a quite nicely named representation of the Jira functionality, or of the ticket data in Jira. And of course, well, yeah, we can see that this is actually adding some sort of a pointer class to a bell icon, and actually maybe closing new notification center while clicking outside of the popover container. So I think this was actually about adding this little button here, and making this functionality go away if we click on the bell icon. So there was actually a ticket for that. But now, because we are now adding the kind of Friends layer now on top of the CData functionality, where the CData is now responsible for making sure that if you or that this query, SQL query, is actually translated into a proper REST request, and then we're getting the data back, and then we are processing that data that we're getting back into the standard format that you see here. And of course, you can now use the standard format as you would any other database stuff. So I could, for example, create an SMS result for myself here by directly accessing accessing some of the stuff here. So I could get my key description, reporter display name, for example, and form a new SMS message based on that. And just to kind of show that in action, we can go through that and run it once. So let's run our example once here. And a good thing to note here that actually if we are running through the example here, you shouldn't be alarmed that even if it takes 12 seconds or 9 seconds or 20 seconds, it's just our Jira at this point, which is actually quite slow. And the query that I'm executing isn't the fastest in the world to go through in Jira, but in the next step, for example, when we are calling the HubSpot system, it's blazing fast. So you shouldn't experience any kind of overhead from the enterprise connection or connector library compared to the open source connector. It's mostly about how fast the system is able to actually return the data that we're interested in. But just to kind of briefly go through the example here again. So if we are queuing our Jira to get the latest ticket for friends, and of course, yeah, we had exactly the same ticket, so no one had created anything else afterwards. So that means that then we are using that to then, just as an example, create the SMS message where we are dynamically getting the data out of our query and sending that SMS out as we would in any other standard integration use case. But from another perspective here, so if we look at this from a little bit of a different perspective, so that was just to demonstrate the kind of query properties and how you can utilize SQL in that case. But of course, now majority of the value also comes in the case of updates and inserts, since in many cases, as is the case in, for example, HubSpot, where I'm gonna be going through in our next example here, utilizing the interfaces and the connectivity options to various systems is usually quite straightforward when you're querying data and getting data. But especially in the cases where you have to update or insert data, then things usually get a little bit more complicated, since you have to follow the specific formats that the system or services is forcing you to, usually to the letter. So that means that you might actually have to create a huge REST request just to do a simple update, such as this. So for example, updating the city function for HiQ Finland in our own HubSpot. So just to kind of show this off, that if I run the similar query to actually get all the information from a specific company, and this company ID is now HiQ Finland in our own HubSpot, and everything of course works exactly the same. So we have our HubSpot execute query connection exactly like we had our Jira connection there. And if I run through this HubSpot query test here to see what sort of data we actually have there or have stored on HiQ Finland, and how is HiQ Finland now represented in our own HubSpot. So let's let the test run there a little bit to kind of give you guys an idea. So of course, yep, here we have all of the different functionality and all of the different data for HiQ Finland now from the HiQ from our HubSpot. But that this usually also means that if I wanted to now create a new company or update this existing company like I'm doing here, what I would actually have to do in the case of HubSpot is provide a whole bunch of kind of mandatory values to make sure that the update goes through, since of course systems want to validate and make sure that the data that you're updating or the data that you're inserting is correct. So that means that I think at least half of all of these fields are mandatory when you would be dealing with HubSpot and updating data towards HubSpot. But now, of course, what the CData is helping us with is that they're taking care of all of that mandatory stuff, so we can actually only focus on what we're interested in. So in the case of, for example, HubSpot here, and if we go through the example, there should be the city Espoo here, and if I just wanted to update the city of Espoo and none of the other values using the traditional method, I would have to provide something like 20 or 30 fields to go through with the update. But now that the CData task is taking care of that for us, what we could actually do is maybe, well, let's change that to be Helsinki, just as an example. So let's run through our test here to actually update our companies to be, or update our HiQ Finland to be hosted in Helsinki. Run through that. It's just 3 lines of configuration as opposed to maybe 20 or 50 lines of configuration that you would have to do. So this is a really good, like a prime example of when you're dealing with inserts and updates, things are much easier when utilizing the CData tasks. And of course, this becomes even more pronounced when we then start updating only specific companies or specific functionalities, and we can utilize our where conditions to really have quite nice fine-grained control over how we are actually kind of targeting our update or targeting our insertion in different scenarios. But just as an example there, if we ran through our update, so we set our city to be Helsinki. So let's just actually run through another test here. So let's create new test and select the same company again and see if we actually updated the value or not. But you should be pretty apparent here the benefit versus doing it the I would say old-fashioned way of just utilizing the REST APIs directly. So let's let our test run here and see if we can get any of the data back here. Any moment now, should be done. Running. Or we could of course also go to the actual HubSpot website there. But I guess the test should be finished now any moment now, or not. Oh, well, hello. Well, let's run you again then and get the data. So let's see here. Hopefully, yeah, there we go. So just to show you that now, of course, we've updated the city or only the city to be Helsinki, and this is pretty much the general idea and theme on how we are utilizing or how we are speeding up the development using the enterprise tasks. Since of course all of the standard SQL functionality is supported, you should be able to do pretty much anything and everything you need in a much nicer and cleaner way than you would previously be doing by just connecting to the REST faces directly. All right, we still have 15 minutes of official time left, but I think it's we covered all the topics that I wanted to go through today, and no need to actually linger or go through this in any more detail. So I highly encourage all of you to kind of maybe take a look at some of the connectors that are available there that we're providing, and we'll of course be sending kind of detailed information in the form of a newsletter in the coming weeks. And of course we're going to be updating our documentation here. So documentation on the actual Friends documentation page will be updated to reflect all of the supported tasks, and we will have some example use cases for you there. And of course, if this seems like it's something that you would be interested in, or you see that could speed up the development and would be of value, then of course we can arrange some sort of like a test for you and kind of go through this stuff in more detail, so please don't hesitate to actually contact us. And like I said, in the as we start kind of unloading or unveiling each of the connectors, so not all of them will be coming out once or coming out at once. So we're going to be doing a couple at a time. So maybe three or four at a time, and then try and actually bring them out on a quite rapid pace. But once you start seeing them, and we'll let you know in the form of a newsletter, and of course also as a notification on the Friends notification bar here, you should maybe definitely try and check them out and see if they would be of help. And then of course you have to think about, is it worth the cost to actually start using the enterprise connectors here to implement the integration functionality that you need. All right. Thanks for everyone for listening, and we'll definitely be in touch via newsletter regarding the new tasks, and once they're actually available for you to test out in your friends. But everyone stay safe and have a great Wednesday. So, thank you.